Grandma, pretend you're sick and get out now. My granddaughter wrote at dinner. 10 minutes later, I'll never forget the cold shock that ran through me when I read those words on my phone screen. My hands trembled as I sat at that beautifully set dinner table, surrounded by smiling faces that suddenly felt like masks. Emma's message glowed up at me like a warning flare in the darkness, and in that moment, I knew something terrible was about to happen. Something my sweet 16-year-old granddaughter had discovered before it was too late. But let me start from the beginning, because every storm has its quiet sky before the thunder rolls in. Welcome back to Grandma Alice Stories, my dear friends. I'm Alice, and this is where I share the lessons life has taught me, sometimes gently, sometimes through tears, but always with truth. If you're new here, please subscribe and join our family. Your support means the world to this old heart, and I'm hoping to reach 1,000 subscribers before next week. Now, settle in with your tea because today's story, well, it's one I never thought I'd have to tell. It was a Thursday evening in late September when my son Richard called. I remember because I'd just finished tending to my little rose garden, the one Harold planted for me before he passed. My fingers still smelled of earth and lavender when I picked up the phone. "Mom," Richard's voice sounded cheerful, almost too cheerful. "Susan and I are hosting a dinner party this Saturday. We'd love for you to come. 7 o'clock sharp, okay? Wear something nice." Something nice. I held those words in my mind as I hung up. Richard rarely invited me to their house anymore, not since he married Susan 3 years ago. Their modern home with its marble countertops and crystal chandeliers always made me feel like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a jewelry store. But he was my son, my only child, and I'd learned to swallow my discomfort for the sake of seeing him and my precious Emma. I spent Friday afternoon at the mall, something I rarely did anymore on my modest pension. But I wanted to make Richard proud. I found a lavender dress with delicate lace at the collar, elegant but not extravagant. When I tried it on, the salesgirl smiled and said, "Your family will love this." I hope she was right. Saturday arrived with golden autumn light filtering through my kitchen windows. I baked my famous apple crumble, the one Richard used to beg for as a boy. The scent of cinnamon and brown sugar filled my small home, and for a moment, I felt young again, back when my son would wrap his arms around my waist and tell me I was the best mom in the world. Where had that boy gone? When had he started looking at me with distant politeness instead of warmth? I pushed the thought away and focused on getting ready. I styled my silver hair, applied a touch of lipstick, and clasped the pearl necklace Harold gave me on our 25th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw an old woman trying very hard to be enough. The thought made my chest tighten, but I smiled anyway. Hope, I've learned, is sometimes all we have. The drive to Richard's house took 20 minutes. Their neighborhood was the kind where every lawn looked painted, every mailbox gleamed. I parked my modest sedan between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling suddenly very small. But I clutched my apple crumble and walked to the front door with my head high. Dignity, my mother once told me, is something no one can take unless you hand it to them. Susan answered the door. She was stunning as always, blonde hair swept up in an intricate style, a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, diamonds glinting at her throat. Her smile was wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Alice, you came. Come in, come in." She air-kissed near my cheeks, never quite touching. "Oh, you brought dessert. How thoughtful. I'll have the caterer find a place for it in the kitchen." "The caterer?" "Of course." My homemade crumbles suddenly felt foolish. She ushered me into the living room where several people I didn't recognize were already gathered, couples in expensive clothes holding wine glasses, their laughter polished and practiced. Richard stood near the fireplace talking to a distinguished-looking man in a gray suit. When he saw me, he waved but didn't come over. My heart sank a little. Then I saw Emma. My beautiful granddaughter sat on the far end of the leather sofa, her dark hair falling around her face, her fingers nervously gripping her phone. When our eyes met, I saw something that chilled me: fear. Pure, undisguised fear. She gave me the smallest shake of her head, so subtle no one else would notice. But I noticed. Grandmas always notice. "Alice, let me introduce you to everyone," Susan said loudly, placing a cold hand on my shoulder. She proceeded to parade me around the room like an artifact. "This is Richard's mother, Alice. She lives in that charming little cottage on Maple Street. You know, the older part of town." Charming. Older. The words dripped with condescension, but the guests smiled politely and shook my hand. I felt their eyes assessing me, my department store dress, my modest jewelry, the worn edges of my handbag. I was being measured and found lacking, and Susan was orchestrating it all with a hostess's practiced grace. "Dinner will be served in 10 minutes, Susan announced. "Alice, you'll sit here." She gestured to a chair at the dining table that was positioned almost like a throne, directly across from where she and Richard would sit, with all the guests flanking the sides. Center stage. On display. Something twisted in my stomach. This wasn't a family dinner. This was something else entirely. I took my seat, my hands folded in my lap. Emma slid into the chair beside me, her phone clutched tight. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chatter. "I need to tell you something." "Emma, darling, come help me in the kitchen," Susan called sharply. My granddaughter's face went pale, but she stood obediently and followed her mother. I watched them go, that knot in my stomach tightening. The other guests settled around the table, their conversations flowing around me like water around a stone. I smiled when appropriate, nodded politely, but I felt invisible. No, worse, I felt like a specimen being studied. Richard sat down across from me and finally met my eyes. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, but there was something off in his tone. Something apologetic and guilty all at once. "Of course, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'm always happy to see you and Emma." He looked away quickly, picking up his wine glass. The servers brought out the first course, some kind of foam on a tiny plate that looked more like art than food. I picked up my fork, trying to remember which utensil went with which course. Susan was watching me like a hawk, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't just about dinner. This was about making me feel small, out of place, inadequate. But Emma returned to her seat, and I noticed her hands were shaking. She wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes on her phone, typing furiously under the table. My heart began to race. Something was very, very wrong. The conversation around the table grew louder, more animated. Susan held court like a queen, telling stories that made everyone laugh. Richard smiled along, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. And then, just as the main course was being served, my phone buzzed in my purse. I normally would never check it during dinner. Harold taught me better manners than that, but something told me to look. I discreetly pulled it out under the table and glanced at the screen. Emma's message blazed up at me in all capitals. "Grandma, pretend you're sick and get out now." My blood turned to ice. I looked up slowly, my eyes finding Emma's across the white tablecloth and crystal glasses. She was staring at me with such desperate intensity that tears were forming in her eyes. And in that frozen moment, with the sounds of laughter and clinking silverware echoing around me, I realized something that would haunt me for weeks to come. This dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. And I was the guest of honor. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read Emma's message again, each word burning into my mind like a brand. "Grandma, pretend you're sick and get out now." Around me, the dinner party continued, laughter bouncing off the walls, wine glasses clinking, Susan's voice rising and falling in practiced charm. But I felt like I was underwater, everything muffled and distant except for the roaring of blood in my ears. I looked at my granddaughter. Emma's face was ghostly pale, her lips pressed together so hard they turned white. She gave me the smallest nod, her eyes pleading. "Trust me," that look said. "Please, Grandma, trust me." And I did. I've learned over 73 years on this earth that when a child, especially a brave, honest child like Emma, warns you of danger, you listen. Even if you don't understand. Even if it seems impossible. You listen with your heart, not your head. I pressed my napkin to my lips and let out a small, breathy cough. Then another. Susan's eyes snapped to me immediately, sharp as a predator sensing movement in the brush. Alice? Are you all right? Her voice dripped with false concern, loud enough for everyone to hear. I coughed again, this time more dramatically, my hand going to my chest. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice intentionally weak. I'm not feeling well. It came on so suddenly, I think I might need some air. Oh dear, Susan said, rising from her seat. But there was something in her expression. Was it annoyance? Frustration that her carefully planned evening was being disrupted? Perhaps you should lie down. We have a guest room. No, I interrupted quickly, standing on legs that weren't entirely steady, though now it was fear, not acting, that made them shake. I should go home. I don't want to ruin your lovely party. Please, everyone, continue. I'm so sorry. Mom, are you sure? Richard asked, half rising from his chair. For a moment, I saw genuine concern in his eyes, and it broke my heart a little. My son. My beautiful boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. When had the distance between us grown so vast? I'm sure, sweetheart. Just one of my spells. Nothing to worry about. I gathered my purse with trembling fingers. Thank you for inviting me, Susan. Everything was beautiful. Emma was already on her feet. I'll walk Grandma to her car, she said quickly, too quickly. Susan's eyes narrowed, but before she could object, Emma had her arm around my waist and was guiding me toward the front door. The guests, Susan started. I'll be right back, Mother, Emma said, and there was a steel in her voice I'd never heard before. 16 years old, and she was standing up to her mother to protect me. Pride and fear warred in my chest. We made it to the foyer, Emma practically pulling me along. My hands fumbled with the doorknob, my breathing actually becoming labored now, not from illness, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. What was happening? What had Emma discovered? The cool September evening air hit my face as we stepped onto the porch, and I gulped it in gratefully. Emma didn't stop, though. She kept moving, pulling me down the stone walkway toward where my car sat at the curb, her grip on my arms surprisingly strong. Emma, sweetheart, what? Not yet, Grandma, she whispered urgently, glancing back at the house. Not until we're away from the windows. Get in your car. I'm coming with you. But your mother. I don't care. The words burst from her, sharp and desperate. Grandma, please. We need to leave. Now. I'd never heard such urgency in her voice. I unlocked the car with shaking hands and climbed into the driver's seat. Emma ran around to the passenger side and threw herself in, slamming the door. Drive? She said. Just drive. I started the engine, my mind spinning. In the rearview mirror, I could see the warm glow of Richard's house, the shadows of the dinner guests moving past the windows. It looked like a picture of perfect happiness. But my granddaughter was breathing like she'd run a marathon, her phone clutched against her chest, tears now streaming freely down her face. I drove. We made it 2 blocks before I had to pull over, my hands shaking too hard to hold the wheel steady. I turned to Emma, and she collapsed against me, sobbing. Grandma, I'm so sorry, she gasped between tears. I tried to warn you earlier, but Mom kept watching me and I couldn't get you alone. Shoo, baby, it's okay, I soothed, stroking her hair the way I had when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. I'm here. We're safe. Now tell me what's going on. Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked older suddenly, the last remnants of childhood stripped away by whatever knowledge she carried. I heard them, Grandma, Mom and Dad. They were talking in Dad's study yesterday while I was supposed to be at soccer practice. But practice got canceled and I came home early, and I heard everything. My stomach dropped. Heard what, sweetheart? She took a shuddering breath. Mom's been planning this dinner for weeks. She invited all those people, her friends from the country club, Dad's business partners, not to celebrate anything. She invited them to witness her announcement. What announcement? Emma's voice broke. That you're a burden. That you're getting too old to live alone. That they've decided, that she's decided, to put you in a nursing home. She was going to announce it tonight, in front of everyone, so you couldn't argue or make a scene without looking difficult. She told Dad it would be easier that way, that you'd just have to accept it if it was already decided publicly. The world tilted. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. A nursing home, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Shady Pines, that place over on Route 9. She already toured it. Already started the paperwork. Emma's tears were flowing again. Grandma, I heard her on the phone with the director. She was laughing about how much money they'd save by selling your cottage. She called it a financial drain and said Dad was too sentimental to make the hard choices. Each word was a knife. My cottage, my home, where Harold and I had raised Richard, where every wall held memories, where my rose garden bloomed each spring. My independence. My dignity. She was going to strip it all away, and she was going to do it in front of strangers so I'd be too humiliated to fight back. Did your father? I couldn't finish the question. Please, God, let Richard not be part of this. Emma bit her lip. He tried to argue with her at first. I heard him say it wasn't right, that you were still capable, that you just moved there 5 years ago and loved it. But Mom... She paused, her voice hardening. Mom knows how to manipulate him. She told him his business partners would think more highly of him if he showed he could make tough family decisions. She said keeping you in your cottage made him look weak and overly emotional. And she kept talking about the money, how they could use it for my college fund, for renovations on their house. So my son had objected. That gave me a small, painful comfort. But he'd been overruled, worn down, convinced that throwing his mother away was somehow the responsible thing to do. The dinner tonight, Emma continued, was supposed to end with Mom standing up and making this big speech about how they'd made the difficult but necessary decision to transition you to professional care. She even wrote it out, Grandma. I found it in her planner. She was going to thank everyone for supporting the family during this challenging time, and then she'd arranged for Dad to hand you a brochure for Shady Pines while everyone watched. A brochure. Like I was a problem to be solved, a business transaction to be completed. I thought of all the Sundays I'd babysat Emma when she was little, all the times I'd cooked meals for Richard when Susan was too busy with her social clubs, all the love I'd poured into this family. And this was how it ended, with a public execution disguised as a dinner party. How did you find all this out? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Emma held up her phone. I recorded them. Yesterday in the study, and then today I hid my phone in the kitchen while Mom was rehearsing her speech with Mrs. Peterson from next door. I have everything, Grandma. Every word. My granddaughter, my brave, brilliant granddaughter had gathered evidence like a detective, had risked her mother's wrath to protect me. I pulled her close again, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, trying not to fall apart completely. What do we do now? She whispered against my shoulder. I sat there in my parked car, 2 blocks from my son's house of lies, holding my granddaughter while my heart shattered and reformed itself into something harder. Something that understood a truth I'd been avoiding. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who hurt you most. And sometimes you have to save yourself. I pulled back and looked into Emma's eyes, Harold's eyes. I realized, the same deep brown that had watched me with love for 47 years. Now, I said softly, a strange calm settling over me. Now we go to my cottage and we listen to those recordings. All of them. Emma nodded, fresh determination replacing the tears on her face. As I started the car again and pulled back onto the road, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd arrived at that dinner party an hour ago. That woman had been hopeful, eager to please, willing to make herself small to fit into spaces that no longer wanted her. This woman was something different. This woman was done being silent. The drive to my cottage passed in a blur of streetlights and silence. Emma sat beside me, her phone clutched in both hands like it held the secrets of the universe. And in a way, I suppose it did. Secrets that would unravel the carefully constructed facade of my son's marriage and reveal the rot beneath. My hands had stopped shaking by the time I pulled into my driveway. The little cottage Harold built looked exactly as I'd left it hours ago. The porch light glowing warm and welcoming, my wind chimes singing softly in the September breeze, the rose bushes Harold planted standing guard like faithful sentries. My home. And Susan had already planned to take it from me, to sell it off like it meant nothing, like 47 years of memories could be erased with a real estate listing. Not while I still had breath in my body. "Come on, sweetheart," I said to Emma, my voice steadier than I felt. We walked up the familiar stone path together, and I unlocked the door to the scent of the apple crumble I'd baked that morning. A lifetime ago, it seemed now. I made us tea, chamomile for Emma, Earl Grey for myself, and we settled on the worn sofa where Harold used to read his evening paper. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she pulled up her phone, her finger hovering over the screen. "Are you sure you want to hear this, Grandma?" she asked quietly. It's really bad." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I need to hear it, baby. All of it. The truth might hurt, but lies hurt worse in the long run. Your grandfather taught me that." She nodded and pressed play. The first recording crackled to life, Susan's voice, sharp and irritated, echoing from wherever Emma had hidden the phone. "Richard, we've been over this 1,000 times. Your mother cannot keep living alone in that cottage. She's 73 years old. She's perfectly capable, Susan." That was my son's voice, and hearing the defensiveness in it made my throat tighten. "She gardens, she drives, she manages her own finances." "For now," Susan interrupted. "But what about when she falls and breaks a hip? When she forgets to turn off the stove? When she becomes a liability? Do you want that phone call in the middle of the night? Do you want that responsibility? She's my mother, not a responsibility." "Oh, don't be naive." The contempt in Susan's voice was like acid. "Everyone becomes a responsibility eventually. And that cottage is sitting on prime real estate. Do you know what it's worth? Especially with the new development going in 2 blocks over? We could get 300,000, maybe more. Money we could use for Emma's college, for the beach house we've been talking about, for my charity foundation." A long pause. Then Richard's voice, quieter, more defeated. It feels wrong, Susan. Like I'm abandoning her." "You're not abandoning her. You're making a mature, responsible decision about her care. Shady Pines is a lovely facility. She'll have people around, activities, medical staff on site. It's actually better for her." Better for her or better for us? Another pause. When Susan spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, more manipulative. I recognized that tone. She used it when she wanted something. "Richard, honey, I know this is hard. But think about our family. Think about Emma's future. Think about how your business partners see you, as a man who can make tough choices, who doesn't let sentiment cloud his judgment. That's the kind of man who gets promoted to senior partner. That's the kind of man who provides for his family. I just wish there was another way. There isn't. And the dinner party on Saturday will make it easier. Trust me. With witnesses, with a formal announcement, she won't be able to argue or make a scene. It'll be clean, dignified. Done." The recording ended. Emma immediately pulled up another one. "This is from today," she whispered. "In the kitchen before you arrived." I braced myself. This time it was Susan talking to someone else. Mrs. Peterson, from the sound of it, one of the women who'd been at the dinner party. "So grateful you could come tonight, Margaret. I know it's short notice, but I really need witnesses for this." "Of course, dear. Though I must say, it seems rather public." Couldn't you tell Alice privately? Susan's laugh was cold and brittle. Oh, Margaret, you don't understand. Alice is from that generation. Stubborn, prideful, thinks she can do everything herself. If we tell her privately, she'll fight it. She'll cry, she'll guilt-trip Richard, she'll make it impossibly messy. But in front of guests? In a formal setting? She'll have no choice but to smile and accept it gracefully. It's really the kindest way. If you say so. And you said something about the cottage? 300,000 minimum. The location is perfect, and with some renovations, it could flip for even more. Richard's been too sentimental about it, but once this is done, once Alice is settled at Shady Pines, we can move forward. I've already spoken to a realtor. Well, you've certainly thought this through. I always do, Margaret. I always do. The recording clicked off. Silence filled my little living room, the kind of silence that follows an explosion when the dust is still settling and you're trying to understand what just got destroyed. Emma was crying again, soft hiccuping sobs. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry she's like this. But I wasn't crying. Something had crystallized inside me as I listened to those recordings. Something hard and clear and unbreakable. For years, I'd made excuses for Susan's coldness, her little cruelties, her way of making me feel small. I told myself she was just different from me, that she came from money and didn't understand simpler lives. I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than speaking up. But this wasn't a misunderstanding or a personality clash. This was calculated, premeditated. She'd manipulated my son, staged a public humiliation, and planned to steal my home, all while convincing herself and everyone else that she was doing the right thing, the mature thing. Emma, I said quietly, send those recordings to my phone. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. What are you going to do? I took a sip of my tea, buying myself a moment to think. What was I going to do? The old Alice, the one who'd walked into that dinner party hoping to make her son proud, would have quietly accepted defeat. Would have convinced herself that maybe Susan was right, that maybe she was too old, too much trouble, too much of a burden. But that Alice had died somewhere between Emma's warning text and hearing her daughter-in-law laugh about selling her home. First, I said, I'm going to call your father. He needs to hear these recordings. He needs to know exactly what his wife planned to do tonight. He'll be so angry. But he should be. And then, I looked around my cottage, at the photos of Harold on the mantel, at the bookshelf he'd built with his own hands, at the kitchen table where we'd shared 47 years of meals and laughter and quiet mornings. At the home we'd built together, the sanctuary Susan thought she could take with a signature and a real estate listing. Then we make sure this never happens to anyone else, I said firmly. Your mother wanted to humiliate me publicly, to strip away my dignity in front of witnesses. She wanted to make me powerless. I met Emma's eyes. But she made a mistake, sweetheart. She underestimated you. And she definitely underestimated me. Emma's tears had stopped. In their place was something that looked almost like hope. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and pulled up my contacts. My finger hovered over Richard's name. It was nearly 9 o'clock. The dinner party would be wrapping up by now. Guests saying their goodbyes, Susan probably furious that her grand announcement had been derailed by my convenient illness. Let her be furious. Let her wonder what went wrong with her perfect plan. I mean, I said, pressing the call button, that your grandfather always told me, Alice, the truth is like water. You can dam it up, redirect it, try to control it, but eventually it finds its way through. Well, the truth is about to flood right through Susan's carefully constructed dam. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Mom. Richard's voice sounded strained, worried. Are you okay? You left so suddenly. Richard, I interrupted gently, I need you to come to my cottage. Right now. Without Susan. This is important. Mom, the guest just left and Susan's upset that you... Richard Michael Harrison. I used his full name, the way I had when he was a boy, and I needed him to truly listen. I need you to trust your mother one more time. Come to my cottage. Come alone. I have something you need to hear, and it can't wait until morning. A long pause. Then, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and looked at Emma. She was watching me with something like awe. Grandma, she said softly, you're kind of a badass. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the hurt, the shattered trust, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise both of us. Language, young lady, I said, but I was smiling. Now, help me make a fresh pot of tea. Something tells me it's going to be a very long night. As Emma moved to the kitchen, I sat alone for a moment with my phone in my hands, those recordings waiting like loaded guns. Outside, the wind chimes sang their gentle song, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds. A normal night in a normal neighborhood. Except nothing was normal anymore. In 20 minutes, my son would walk through that door. In 20 minutes, I would play him those recordings and watch his world crumble. I would show him exactly who he'd married, exactly what she'd planned to do to his mother. And then Richard would have to make a choice. His wife or his mother? His comfortable life or the truth? I didn't know what he would choose. But I knew what I would do if he chose wrong. I would survive. I would protect my home. I would stand my ground. Because I was Alice Harrison, and I'd been through worse than Susan's schemes. I'd buried a husband I loved more than breathing. I'd raised a son alone while working 2 jobs. I'd weathered storms that would have broken lesser women. Susan thought I was weak. Disposable. A problem to be solved. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Thank you for staying with me through this part of my story, dear friends. The night is far from over, and what happened when Richard arrived? Well, that's a tale that still makes my hands shake to remember. If you want to know how this story ends, how I faced my son, how the truth came out, and how karma finally caught up with Susan, then please subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. And if this story has touched your heart, leave a comment below. Sometimes we all need to know we're not alone in our struggles. I'll see you in the next chapter, my dears. Until then, remember, the truth always finds its way through.